A few weeks back, we published the top 7 reasons you should think about supercharging your C5 Corvette. Now, clearly, there's a lot of people out there thinking about supercharging their C5 because the video has done extremely well with over 19,000 views and 98% thumbs up. But that leaves 2% of the people that were less than convinced. I do try to read as many of the comments as possible, and while most were positive, there's a few criticisms that did stick out. One gentleman even went so far as to say I was giving bad advice. We're going to talk about what those criticisms were, if they're valid, and a whole lot more next.
Toys for Life.
A couple individuals argued that you can make 500 plus streetable horsepower with heads and cam. To which I would say we must be using a different definition of the word streetable. Another individual said that a heads and cam car can be just as reliable as a supercharged stock LS1. I guess I can see that, but if either method had a failure, I would guess that the method of failure is going to be quite different. If a heads and cam car was to fail, most likely I would expect some sort of a valve train failure, which ultimately can take out a piston as well. The likelihood of a failure in that situation, in my mind anyway, would depend upon how radical a cam that they chose, and then the quality of spring that they chose, as well as the specs of that spring, if it was properly matched up to the lift and the RPM that they intended to run. I would guess that the most common reason for a catastrophic failure on a supercharged stock LS1 would either be a tuning related error or a fueling issue which could easily take out a piston. Another likely cause could be just simply getting too greedy and going for 700 plus horsepower on a stock bottom end LS1, which in my mind is probably a recipe for disaster. Finally, there were a couple other criticisms that just plain said that supercharging the stock LS1 is just not a good idea for some C5 Corvette owners. To which I would say, you're probably right. So let's go ahead and talk about some legitimate and valid reasons that you might not want to supercharge your stock bottom end LS1 or LS6 C5 Corvette. And what I mean by stock bottom end is that it has the same block, crankshaft, rods, and pistons that it did from the factory. The first reason you might not want to supercharge your stock bottom end C5 is if you plan to do any sort of organized road racing where you're on and off the throttle repeatedly and aggressively over multiple minutes. There are 2 main reasons that this creates a problem. The first main reason is all of that air that the supercharger adds to make that extra horsepower unfortunately adds a lot of extra combustion heat. If this goes on for too long, the piston rings get too hot, and when they get hot, they expand. And as they expand, if they go too far and touch each other, the piston rings will actually kind of lock to the cylinder walls, potentially tearing the top of the piston off, which is obviously a pretty expensive and catastrophic failure. The second reason has to do with intercooler capacity. If you're not familiar with what an intercooler is, it's essentially another radiator that gets mounted towards the front of the C5 when you install your supercharger kit. And air that comes from the supercharger head unit flows into the intercooler, and that helps to reduce a lot of heat before that air enters the engine. This is needed because anytime you supercharge air, it compresses air, and when you do that, it also concentrates the heat that was in the larger amount of air into the smaller space, and that greatly increases the air temperature. So the intercooler does an excellent job of dissipating as much of that heat before it enters into the engine for a while. Exactly how long is a while? That's going to depend on a number of factors, but what I can tell you firsthand is if you were to use an A&A Vortex supercharger kit, for example, it's going to keep those air temperatures at a reasonable level long enough to conquer the quarter mile with enough horsepower to achieve over 130 miles an hour. And of course, that next morning on your way to work, you'll easily be able to conquer the longest freeway on-ramp you might come across. Make no mistake about it, using a supercharged engine in your C5 on an endurance road course will tax every ounce of your car's ability to keep its coolant cool, oil, power steering fluid, and of course incoming air from the supercharger cool. To fully appreciate just how difficult this is, when you're done watching this video, of course, Go ahead and Google C7 Z06 track cooling issues. The second type of C5 owner that I would advise against supercharging their car would be the street racer, specifically the type of street racer that likes to do those back-to-back, say 50 to 130 mile an hour passes against the same car. That's a little bit too long under full throttle boost, and in my opinion, you run the risk of having those rings get too hot like we talked about before and take out your motor.
2 teenagers were also run down and hospitalized. One was later pronounced dead, the other still in critical condition.
The third type of use that I'd advise against using a supercharger for would be something that's near and dear to my heart because it's on my bucket list, and that would be a race like the Texas Mile, or any mile race for that matter. One whole mile under full boost. Again, I think it's probably a little too long to put a supercharger on a stock bottom end and get away with it. I might be wrong, guys. If you're watching this video and you have participated in a race like the Texas Mile with your supercharged stock bottom end C5, let us know in the comments below if you got away with it or if there was any issues. I'd love to hear it. And the final reason you might not want to consider something like a Vortex supercharger on your C5 or any vehicle for that matter, and this is something that's not widely known, and it's in the Vortex warranty. If you expose your Vortex supercharger to a cold start of under 25 degrees Fahrenheit, your warranty is void. I'm not sure if it would take out your supercharger under 25 degrees, but if it does, they're not going to cover it. Now that we've gone through all the situations why you shouldn't supercharge your C5, let me reiterate the big reason why you should. If you're like 98% of C5 owners, you're just into spirited street driving, you love hammering it on those on-ramps, you've got the occasional encounter with a Mustang, and maybe you like to go to the drag strip and run the quarter mile once in a while, then supercharging your stock bottom end C5, in my humble opinion, is absolutely for you. Guys, that's going to do it for this video. If you liked it, please hit that share, like, and subscribe. If there's other C5 content that you'd like us to touch on, please leave it in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching.